Long before the calamity-scarred Exandria, the distant continent of Vellora thrived across the seas. It was a place where the veil between planes grew thin, where portals to realms of fire, shadow, and starlight stood open beneath the sky. Great peoples rose and fell there, their lives intertwined with the powers that flowed freely from beyond the world. But when the calamity raged and threatened to unravel all creation, the gods intervened. To prevent the chaos of the plains from consuming Exandria, they cast a great shroud over Vellora, a wall of storms and fog, woven with divine magic. Cut off from the rest of the world, its people endured in isolation, guarding what remained of the ancient gateways. Legends say the veil was both a prison and a shield, keeping the secrets of the land hidden and safe. For centuries, sailors spoke only of shattered ships and lost fleets, swallowed whole when they sought to cross the storm-racked seas. Few returned, and those who did told tales of strange lights on the horizon and voices carried on the wind. Vellora became a myth, a warning whispered in taverns and mapped only in the margins of old charts. Now, the veil has begun to thin. Ships that once broke upon endless storms have found safe passage. The Dwendalian Empire has planted its banners on these distant shores, eager to claim its riches and unlock its secrets. But beyond the foothold of civilization lie wild frontiers, ancient guardians, untamed creatures, and powers older than history itself. And at the edge of this frontier lies Stonecross, a rugged coastal settlement perched upon cliffs battered by endless waves. Born from shipwrecks and hardened by storms, it is a place of iron wills and weary eyes, where settlers, smugglers, and dreamers gather to carve out new lives. This is Stonecross. And this is the Veil. The sea was rough. The docks were grey. And the two new settlers stepped off the creaking boat and onto the edge of the empire, a place called Stonecross. Salt wind bit at their faces. The settlement clung to the coastline like it was holding on for dear life. A handful of soldiers waited at the PA, but one man stood ahead of the rest. Broad shoulders, chainmail dulled by salt, and a stare sharp enough to cut rope. Sergeant Halric Dern cracked his knuckles once, then spoke with a voice that carried like a hammer hitting steel. "Welcome to Stonecross. You set foot on the edge of the Empire. Out here, there's no room for idleness or dissent. This village stands because every soul pulls their weight. Theft, violence, treachery, none of it will be tolerated. You break the peace, you'll answer to me." He let the silence hang for a heartbeat, like a test of nerve. "For tonight, you'll be housed together in a settler's lodge. Space is scarce, and a shared roof breeds accountability. Tomorrow, 8 sharp, you'll report to the clerk at the hall. Don't be late. Stonecross is fragile, every mistake cuts deeper out here than it would back in the Empire." Jim leaned over to Orion and muttered under his breath, "Friendly place." Halric didn't blink. Friendly doesn't keep people alive. The soldiers stepped aside. The settlement awaited. After the grim welcome on the docks, Jim and Orion followed the narrow cobblestone street deeper into the settlement. The fog rolled low and thick, curling between weather-beaten buildings that looked more like they were clinging on than standing proud. The sounds of the sea were never far away, gulls crying overhead, waves slapping against the pier. At the far end of the dockside sat the Keel House. Built from the wreck of Tamsin's old ship, the Gannet, its curved ribs arched up around the tavern like the bones of some ancient sea beast. The mast still rose through the center of the roof, lanterns swaying gently from its rigging. Sailcloth awnings stretched out over the dockside seating, catching the damp evening breeze. The air carried the heavy mix of salt, tar, smoke, and ale. Seagulls perched along the mast and rigging, and a handful of ravens crouched on the rooftop, their glossy feathers catching the dim lantern light. Some villagers said it was a good sign. Others whispered it was a warning. Inside, the Keel House was warm, loud, and dim. The timber creaked with every footstep. A fire roared in a brazier made from an old ship's cauldron. A few sailors and settlers nursed tankards at scarred tables. Jim and Orion claimed a bench beneath a hanging net of old fishing gear. The heat from the fire slowly chased away the bite of the sea wind. "Not bad," Jim muttered, stretching out with a grin. "Smells better than the boat." "You mean it doesn't smell like damp socks?" Orion replied. Jim raised his tankard. Progress. From a table near the bar, two older men spoke in low, deliberate tones. Their voices carried just enough over the crackle of the brazier. "There's a native village upriver," one said. "Storm worshippers. They say the fog's a blessing. Keeps outsiders away. Or keeps something in," the other answered, grimly. Jim leaned toward Orion, lowering his voice. "You hear that? Sounds like the sort of place people disappear." Orion raised a brow, swirling the last of his ale. "Or the sort of place people find meaning." Jim snorted. "You and your meaning." The door rattled as a gust of cold wind swept through the tavern. Outside, the fog thickened. Curiosity eventually drew Jim and Orion up the hill overlooking the sea. At the crest sat the Moonweaver's shrine, small, quiet, and beautiful in its simplicity. The pale driftwood marble of the crescent-shaped altar caught the faint silver glow of the evening sky. Thin grooves ran through the stone where offerings of coins, flowers, or tokens could be placed. The breeze carried the scent of brine and wildflowers. Below, the sea shimmered with soft moonlight, rippling silver across the waves. It wasn't hard to see why sailors, settlers, and guards came here to whisper their hopes, fears, and secrets to the goddess. Orion stepped forward with the solemn focus of a priest returning home. He drew in a deep breath, lifted his hand skyward, and began his prayer, except, to anyone watching, it looked a bit much. He spread his arms wide like a stage actor, head tilted toward the moon, speaking in a low, rhythmic tone. His gestures were exaggerated, almost dramatic, casting strange shadows over the stone altar. Jim crossed his arms, leaning against the fence at the edge of the hill. "You always pray like you're auditioning for a play." Orion didn't answer. His voice carried across the hill in flowing celestial. Down the path, a girl approached quietly with a small basket of wildflowers. She looked to be about 16 or 17, slender, with long dark hair that caught the breeze. Marla Voss, daughter of Magistrate Elira Voss. She paused as she caught sight of Orion's ritual. His wide, sweeping gestures. His intent stare at the moon. The muttered words she couldn't quite understand. She said softly, clutching her basket a little tighter. Orion turned toward her, still partially in ritual, hands raised, cloak shifting in the wind. "Come closer," he said in his usual calm tone, though to her, it landed somewhere between solemn and unsettling. Her blue-gray eyes widened. "Nope." She took 2 quick steps back, muttered something about weird newcomers, and hurried down the path toward the village. Jim raised his tankard toward Orion like a toast. "Well done, father. Terrify the youth, inspire the masses." Orion sighed, letting his hands drop to his sides. She approached a shrine. "I simply welcomed her." Jim smirked. "Yeah, and I simply steal things." The two stood for a moment in the quiet, the waves below catching the silver of the moon. The fog was starting to roll in again. By the time they made their way through the fog-veiled streets to the settlers' lodge, the night had grown colder. The building was little more than a long timber cabin perched near the edge of the village, its roof patched with tarred canvas and moss. Inside, it smelled faintly of salt, old smoke, and damp wool. 2 narrow cots sat opposite each other, a small table wedged between them, and a single lantern guttered in the corner. It wasn't comfortable, but it was warm, and after the day they'd had, that was enough. Jim threw himself onto the nearest cot with a heavy sigh. "Home sweet home," he muttered, kicking off his boots with one foot. Across the room, Orion carefully unbuckled his gear, folding each piece with precise movements before bowing his head in quiet prayer. Jim was already half asleep by the time the last lantern flame burned low. Grey light crept through the slats of the shutters at dawn. Jim stirred, blinking blearily. The room was quiet, except for a slow, scraping sound near the foot of his bed. Orion sat perched on the edge, hunched slightly forward, running a whetstone down the edge of his blade in steady, deliberate strokes. Jim squinted at him. "You know," he mumbled, "waking up with a guy sharpening steel at the end of my bed isn't exactly my idea of a gentle morning." Orion didn't look up. "It's a blade. Not a knife." "Oh well," Jim grumbled, dragging a hand down his face. "That makes it so much better." Before Orion could reply, the door swung open with a sharp thunk. A young half-elf woman stepped inside like she owned the place, already holding a leather-bound logbook and a quill dripping with fresh ink. Her spectacles rested low on her nose, and her expression was the practiced mix of efficient and tired. "Names," she said briskly. "And don't mumble. I have to file this properly." Jim sat up, hair a mess, still half in a dream. "Jim," he said with a crooked grin. "Professional troublemaker." Her quill scratched across the page. "Rogue." "Noted." Orion stood, posture immaculate. "Orion. Cleric of the Twilight Domain." She glanced up over her glasses. "Religious." "Wonderful." The logbook snapped shut with a crack. "You've got your first task. Northwards. Some scouts went missing. Go find out why. And try not to join them." Jim raised an eyebrow. "Cheery morning greeting." "Yes," she replied dryly, already halfway out the door. "Welcome to Stonecross." Orion gave a quiet nod. Jim stared after her, then muttered, "I'm starting to love this place." The tree line north of Stonecross rose like a dark wall, its skeletal branches clawing into the mist. The air grew colder the deeper they went, the salty tang of the coast fading into the damp, earthy scent of moss, pine, and rotting leaves. Jim took the lead, his boots crunching softly against the wet forest floor. Orion followed a few steps behind, cloak brushing against ferns, the sound of birds long gone silent. The path quickly vanished beneath tangled roots and uneven ground. Mist clung low to their legs, turning every tree into a shadow and every sound into something distant and uncertain. "We're not lost," Jim muttered, squinting at the shifting tree line. "You've said that 3 times, Orion replied flatly. "Yeah," Jim said. "Because if I keep saying it, eventually it'll be true." Branches snapped overhead as a gust of cold wind pushed through the canopy. The vague trail they'd been following disappeared entirely, leaving only an endless sea of grey and green. Jim stopped, frowned, then unclipped the twin swords from his belt. Orion tilted his head. "And what exactly is that going to do?" "Watch and learn." Jim crossed the blades in front of him, the polished steel catching what little light filtered through the mist. For a moment nothing happened, then the metal pulsed with a faint, directional shimmer. The glow leaned slightly to the left, as if pointing. Orion raised an eyebrow. "Useful." Jim gave a half smirk. "Better than your sense of direction, holy man." With the faint glow guiding them, they pressed deeper into the forest. Hours passed. The mist grew heavier, the trees denser. A crow's cry cut through the silence once, distant, then gone. They walked until their boots were slick with mud and their breath came in visible clouds. By the time the swords glowed dim to a soft hum, the sun had shifted overhead, shrouded by cloud. About 8 hours after they left Stonecross, Jim stopped abruptly. Something pale was poking out of the bramble up ahead. At first glance, it could have been a rock. But as he stepped closer and brushed away the leaves, the truth took shape. A human skeleton lay half buried in the mud, its empty socket staring blankly through the mist. Its arm was stretched out, as if reaching for something long lost. Jim crouched low, fingers brushing the damp earth. "Well, that's inviting." Orion didn't wait. His expression hardened, and he strode forward with a sudden burst of righteous fury. "Abominations have no place here." Jim blinked. "Mate, it's already dead." Orion brought the heel of his boot down with a solid crack. The skull splintered, fragments scattering into the mud. Jim let out a long breath through his nose. "You ever heard of—" "I don't know, restraint." "I prefer certainty," Orion replied calmly, as if smashing skulls before breakfast was perfectly reasonable. They knelt beside the remains, checking for anything useful. A small leather pouch hung loosely from its belt. Inside was a bundle of dried herbs, neatly tied, like they'd been gathered with care, not stolen. Jim unrolled a small scrap of parchment from the same pouch. At its corner, a deep crimson lipstick mark, a perfect kiss, pressed into the paper. Jim turned the parchment over. "Well, that's not ominous at all." Orion studied the mark in silence, the mist curling around them. The forest felt a little too quiet. The parchment crinkled softly in Jim's fingers. Then the forest answered with a sound that made both men freeze, a low, rumbling growl rolling out of the mist like thunder through the trees. 3 shapes emerged between the trunks, their eyes glowing like coals in the dark. Ember wolves. They moved like regular wolves, except for the extra pair of legs driving their bodies forward with unnatural speed. Fire pulsed beneath their skin, flickering out between their spines in twisting streams of ember and smoke. Their breath steamed in the cold air. 2 were smaller, lean and fast, their shoulders glowing faintly. But the third, larger than a horse, had fire licking up its back like a living bonfire. It stared straight at Jim and Orion, its lips peeling back to reveal blackened teeth. The growls deepened. "Great," Jim muttered. "You've got a real talent for making friends." "I prefer clarity over hesitation," Orion replied, raising his holy symbol. The wolves didn't wait. They lunged forward first, tearing through the underbrush. The big one went straight for Jim, the ground shaking under its weight. Jim's rapier flashed in a quick arc as the beast closed in, slicing across its shoulder in a burst of sparks. Before it could bite down, Jim twisted away, vanishing into the mist with the fluid grace of someone who liked staying alive. "Not today, doggy," he hissed, retreating 20 feet back through the trees. In a smooth motion, his blade disappeared into its sheath and his crossbow was already in hand. The large wolf let out a deep, burning snarl, but as it reared back to lunge again, Orion extended a hand. A soft, shimmering wave spread across the clearing, a lullaby carried on moonlight. The wolf's steps faltered. Its eyelids drooped, and with a rumbling grunt it slumped into the mud, flames on its back dimming to faint embers. The 2 smaller wolves didn't hesitate. One darted left, the other right, circling Orion with practiced precision. Their glowing forms cast long, shifting shadows through the fog. One snapped at his arm, teeth scraping against his armor, while the other went for his flank. From the dark of a low bush, Jim steadied his aim. His finger squeezed the trigger. The bolt flew true, thudding into the ribs of the left wolf. It let out a yelp that echoed through the trees before collapsing in a smoldering heap. The second wolf turned, teeth bared, uncertain now. It took a step back, ready to flee into the mist. Orion's mace came down in a clean, heavy arc. The creature barely had time to move before the blow connected, crushing its skull with a sharp crack. The only sound that remained was the faint, steady breathing of the sleeping ember wolf. Jim rose from the bush, brushing damp leaves from his coat. "He's still snoring." "Not for long," Orion said simply. Moving together, they advanced. Jim fired another bolt clean into the wolf's neck, and Orion brought his mace down in one decisive strike. The creature let out a choked, embered growl, and went still. Its flames flickered out into soft smoke. For a moment, the forest was silent again. Only the faint glow of dying embers stained the mist. Jim lowered his crossbow. Well, that was warm. Orion looked down at the scorched ground where the wolves had fallen. They were hunting. "Yeah," Jim muttered, nudging one with his boot. "And we were the meal." The mist crept back in around them, swallowing the last traces of the fight. The forest deepened as the last light of day bled away. A dull orange haze clung to the treetops before the mist swallowed it completely. Crickets fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. That was when they saw the skeleton picking berries. It stood in a small patch of bushes near the tree line, its straw hat tilted low. Its movements were slow and methodical, plucking berries and placing them carefully into a little woven basket. It didn't react like a creature. It moved like a person. Jim blinked. Weirdest farmer I've ever seen. Orion's jaw tightened. It's an abomination. The skeleton finally noticed them, head snapping up sharply. Then it bolted, basket in hand. Orion took off after it without hesitation, mace already in hand. Jim sighed and followed, faster. He ducked low, strung a quick tripwire, and the skeleton hit it cleanly, bones clattering as it crashed into the mud. Jim pinned it down with a fallen branch. "All right, bonehead," he said with a grin. "Where's the rest of the harvest?" Orion didn't say a word. His mace came down hard, shattering the skull in one clean blow. The skeleton fell still. "You really need a hobby," Jim muttered, wiping a smear of mud from his hands. Then came the sound. A faint melody, carried softly through the trees. Wind chimes. A music box. A warm, steady glow flickered ahead. They followed it through the fog until the trees parted into a small clearing. A lonely cottage sat there, half swallowed by ivy, its porch lit by a single swaying lantern. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the faint smell of something sweet drifted out onto the cold air. A woman stood on the porch, cupping her hands to her mouth as she called into the night. "Percival! George! Where have you gone?" Her voice was soft and warm, the kind you'd expect from a kindly aunt, not someone living alone in a forest. She turned the moment she heard footsteps, and rather than surprise, her expression softened into a polite, practiced smile. "Oh," she said gently. "Travelers? Out here at this hour? You must be freezing. Please, sit. You look exhausted." Jim shot Orion a sideways look. Orion didn't say anything, but after a moment's hesitation, they approached and took a seat on the creaky porch steps. The lantern light threw long, soft shadows across the clearing. "I'm Lyra," she said. "It's rare I get visitors. Not many make it this far into the woods anymore." "Yeah," Jim replied, settling in. "Can't imagine why." She laughed lightly, almost as if she didn't catch the edge in his voice. "I live here with my children. My sweet George, and my darling Percival. He's my favorite," she added with a fond sigh, eyes drifting toward the dark trees. "Percival's out picking berries right now. Always so helpful." Orion exchanged a slow glance with Jim. "Right," Jim said carefully. "And George?" At the mention of a name, she turned toward the side of the house and called out brightly, "George! Come say hello, dear." A moment later, something stepped around the corner. A skeleton, wearing a slightly stained baker's apron and a tilted hat. In its hands was a small tray of freshly baked muffins, steam still curling from them as if they'd just come out of the oven. Lyra's face lit up with the warmth of a proud mother. "There he is. My boy George. He loves to bake." Jim's brow crept upward. "That's the skeleton." Her smile didn't falter. "He's my son." The way she said it, softly, gently, like it was the most natural thing in the world, made the air feel heavier. It wasn't a joke. She believed it completely. George shuffled forward on creaking bones and held out the tray. Jim hesitated, then plucked a muffin from it. It smelled of cinnamon and butter. He sniffed it once, then took a bite. "Actually not bad," he said around a mouthful. Lyra clasped her hands together, delighted. He has such a gift for baking. The others were never as patient as George. Percival's clever, of course, but George has heart. Orion shifted slightly, his hand resting near his mace, but he didn't draw it. The porch creaked softly beneath their boots. Jim forced a smile. "Well, you've got quite a family here." She nodded with serene pride. "They keep me company. I don't need anyone else." The forest seemed to press in closer. The chimes swayed. The music box played on somewhere just inside the house. Jim rose slowly. "We should probably keep moving. Big day tomorrow." "Oh," she said, still smiling. "Of course. Travelers have their journeys. But if you ever need a warm meal, my door is always open." Orion's voice was low. "We'll keep that in mind." They stepped down off the porch, careful not to turn their backs on her until they were at the edge of the clearing. She stood in the lantern light, framed by ivy and fog, watching them with calm, distant eyes. George the skeleton baker stood silently at her side, tray still in hand. As they vanished back into the mist, the lantern glow faded. The chimes whispered. The music box played its slow, sweet song. The sky. The only sound was the crackle of the small fire and the occasional drip of condensation from the leaves above. Orion kept watch, sitting with his back to a tree, polishing his armor in the faint light. The fog shifted at the edge of the clearing. Something moved, small, quick shapes darting between the trees, their bodies glowing with embered light. He squinted. They looked almost like monkeys, but their movements were too fast, too fluid. Each leap left a faint trail of flame that vanished as soon as it appeared. One stopped for a heartbeat, staring at him with eyes like tiny furnaces, before vanishing into the mist with a hiss. By dawn, the mist had thinned, though the forest still clung to the morning chill. Jim yawned as he packed his gear. "You look like you didn't sleep." Orion's gaze stayed on the tree line. "I didn't." They pressed north, following the faint slope that led out of the woods. Around midday, the trees broke apart and the world opened up before them. A vast valley stretched out, silent and pale beneath a washed-out sky. Jagged mountain ranges flanked it on either side, their peaks lost to cloud. At the far end of the valley, crude barricades of timber and wire crisscrossed the landscape, a line of defenses long since abandoned or broken. Torn banners flapped weakly in the wind. Jim rested a hand on his crossbow. Whatever built that, didn't do it to keep rabbits out. Orion's eyes narrowed. Then we approached carefully. In the distance, the haze stirred. Shapes moved, slow, deliberate, and too large to be men. Something was waiting.